Please join us for Real and Permanent Good, examining a century of American philanthropy. Please welcome our interviewer, David Rubenstein, and panelists, Warren Buffett, David Rockefeller Jr., and Olivier Zuntz.
So, thank you all very much for coming today, and thank you all for coming. How many people here are philanthropists? How many people want to be philanthropists? Okay, we have some great philanthropists and experts on philanthropy. Let me briefly introduce them. Obviously, they don't need very much introduction. My immediate right is Warren Buffett. I think one of the world's most respected businessmen and philanthropists. He is well known for having built Berkshire Hathaway into one of the most admired and most successful companies in the world. To his right, David Rockefeller Jr., who's part of the Rockefeller family. He is chairman of the Rockefeller Foundation, been involved in a lot of Rockefeller family philanthropies, but also created a number of his own philanthropic involvements and projects. And Olivier Zuntz, who is Commonwealth Professor at the University of Virginia, an expert on philanthropy in America, and written a book, Philanthropy in America. So let's start right away. Warren, how did you decide to get involved with the Giving Pledge and create the Giving Pledge? It's really your idea, Bill and Melinda Gates. Where did the idea come from?
Yeah, it was the three of us. And I think we were out in California at Bill's place and just talking about philanthropy. And we didn't start out with a Giving Pledge exactly. We decided it might be a good idea to get a few people that were interested in philanthropy and see what idea might come out of it. And we wrote David's father and asked if he would host a dinner in New York. Maybe a dozen people came to that. And I would say it sort of evolved out of that dinner.
All right, so now it's 5 years old. Are you very happy with progress?
I think it's far exceeded my expectations. I thought if we got 50 people, it would be terrific. And
so have you found it hard to get people outside the United States to sign up compared to the United States?
Well, it's considerably harder, but Bill has really done that. I mean, in his travels, I've made a couple of appearances with him in China and India, but Bill has been an evangelist on it. And so he's signed up. I don't know whether we have 15 or 20 now, but it's got some momentum now.
We have about 139 total members currently. So let me ask you one final question before we go to David. When you told your children you're giving away essentially all of your money and to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, what was their reaction?
They thought it was terrific. I mean, they have substantial foundations themselves, foundations that I doubled in size a couple of years ago on my birthday. So they in effect each have two or three billion coming to the foundation. I brought along a letter I wrote in 1969, almost 50 years ago, and I was talking about I had three trustees that I'd picked for the foundation who were sort of standby trustees in case my wife and I died jointly. And at that time, I said at the present time, this would mean roughly $20 million to the foundation if we both died at the same time, and $1.5 million to the kids. So they were going to get $500,000 each. So it's always been a situation where they knew overwhelmingly the money was going to go back to society.
And so any regrets about the way you've handled philanthropy? Did you wish you had done more philanthropy as a younger person?
Well, no, because if my wife did. She felt this was kind of a cop-out. I told her there'd be far more money later on. But this letter in 1969, there would have been 20 million, and now there'll be 100 billion. So, I mean, there's been some advantage to waiting.
Well, David, I mentioned this before. Your father and you have a name that I really thought was my name at one point, because I've said when my ancestors came over and they were on Ellis Island, their name was actually Rockefeller. So my name would have been David Rockefeller. But they said, we want a nice ethnic Jewish name so we know that you're really Jewish. So change it from Rockefeller to Rubenstein. If that not changed, my name would be David Rockefeller now. But anyway, so David, you grew up in a family that is well known for philanthropy. It's one of the leading philanthropic families in our country's history. At what age did you realize that your family was a little different than the family down the street?
Well, I think it was my elementary school classmates who brought wealth I was unaware of to my attention. And so I began to quiz my parents about that. But growing up in a family that was already visible for several generations, one could look around and see something called the Rockefeller University about 5 blocks away. So I began to figure out that my relatives had been busy before I arrived.
So when you were growing up, did you decide you wanted to get involved in your family's philanthropies, or did you want to create your own philanthropies?
You know, I think this subject is about differentiation and individuals becoming themselves before, if ever, they become part of an institution that was previously existing. So most of my family, including I think myself, differentiated for quite a while, at least till I was 30, maybe 35, and really did my own thing. I was an orchestra manager and very, very interested, as Warren is, in music. And I had a fantastic time in Boston that had hardly heard of us. They didn't, their Ellis Island brought other people to it. And that was very comfortable and very good. When I was 30, I got a chance to be the president of something called the Rockefeller Family Fund that had next to no endowment. So it was not a high-risk gift of our uncles to put us in charge. But then, unbeknownst to them, a step-grandmother gave $10 million, and suddenly we felt we had real money. And I got a chance to be the leader of that foundation at an early age. That was great.
Well, when you created some of your own philanthropies, many of them involved in the environment, sometimes do you have to ask other people for money? And if your name is Rockefeller, is it hard to ask other people for money?
It's not hard to ask.
So hard to get?
It's sometimes hard to get. No, I mean, I think actually, David, that's been one of the skills of my father and his brothers, to learn to bring people into enterprises that have, who have common interests in medicine or art or whatever, engage them, and then share the load of supporting those enterprises. Very, very important thing to do.
So what are you about with your own children? How do you get them involved in philanthropy? How did you get them involved in your philanthropies or your family's philanthropies?
Well, I have 2 daughters, and they're 33 and 30, so they're right at that age of maybe they'll be ripe to be influenced by a father. I'm not sure.
Let me know what that age is.
Yeah, thanks. In case it happens, you'll be the first to know. I mean, I think how we live is the most important thing. I think we show our values by how we live, and I'm hoping that'll have some impact. They don't have a lot of money, my daughters, and so they're not in a position to be philanthropists, but they're very generous, wonderful girls, women.
Olivier, you, I call the modern American de Tocqueville because you're from France, but you've commented a lot about American society, particularly philanthropy. Why do you think philanthropy is such an American kind of trait and you don't see it that much in Europe?
First, I want to say that I'm thrilled that this institution is doing this program. I think it's absolutely wonderful because it is so, philanthropy is so much a part of American history. When I first came to this country in the late 60s, one of the first books I read was Benjamin Franklin's Autobiography. And he was advising a friend, Reverend Whitefield, on how to build a new church. And he said, well, okay, first you're going to ask in the community, everybody you know is going to give you money. And then when that's done, you're going to ask people you're not sure might give you money, but then you be sure to show them the list of the people who've given money. And then, when you're done with that, then just ask everybody else. And I think that was very good advice, actually. And then once Ben Franklin collected all this money, he did something else for the Library Association or for the Academy that became the University of Pennsylvania or for the hospital. He went to the government, to the province, and he said, well, now you're going to give me you're going to host the library, or you're going to give me the money to build a hospital, because we already have collected much of it in the community. So, he may be known for having invented the lightning rod and many other inventions, but he really invented the matching grant. And so I think from the very fabric of society, you had a lot of investment in the community. And that's the other thing, to really answer your question directly. I think there's a lot of course, benevolent impulse in philanthropy, but there's also a common interest, self-interest.
Let me ask you, it is often said that philanthropy really grew in the United States in the late 1880s, 90s with work of Mr. Rockefeller, Johnny Rockefeller, and Mr. Carnegie. Is that fair, that they were the principal people who kicked off the philanthropy boom in the United States? And what propelled them to do that, do you think?
Well, what it is that there is a change in scale. With the second industrial revolution of electricity and oil and steel and so forth, and the creation of those very large manufacturing concerns, vertical integration, and the like. Now, I think what made this generation very unique in philanthropy is that they found a philanthropic project that really transformed the America and made it possible for this country to rise to global power. And I'm thinking, basically, the graduate school. When these people, the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and the Mellons and the others, were building their firms, there were no labs in this country. Colleges were denominational colleges. Do you know how many graduate students there were in this country, in the entire United States of America, the whole 50 states in 1870? Do you have any clue?
Well, there weren't many.
There were 50. There were 50. Overall, if you wanted a doctorate, you'd go to Germany, go to England. Right. So basically, if you wanted to teach in a college, you had to be a member of the given denomination. Right. I mean, at the University of Chicago, one had to be a Baptist until pretty late in the 20th century to be president. James Angell went to Yale because he was not a Baptist. Even though that was one of the first, had really kind of severed all of these links, except for the presidency. But the point is that they built this network of graduate schools and laboratory and scientific equipment. Right. It's all out of philanthropy.
So in this more modern era, it is often said, and I think it's true, I think he's here today, Ted Turner issued a call to wealthy people saying you should give away more money. He famously gave $1 billion to the United Nations Foundation. What was the impact of Ted Turner's call on philanthropy in your view?
Well, I don't know about the general impact, but certainly the gift to the United Nations was very, very significant. First of all, and I think it was in the mid-90s, and through the 80s and mid-90s, we were not even paying the dues to the United Nations. The U.S. government were not even paying the dues then to the United Nations. So, and there was a great deal of anti-Americanism in all of the international organizations, right. UNESCO and the like. So that, I think, helped a great deal. Second, I think he really propelled the kind of global philanthropy that the Gates Foundation has been famous for, and that he's found a way, a very important way to connect the very global networks of finance to, truck stops in Andhra Pradesh and the south of India. And that is key. And that's the kind of philanthropy that's most threatened nowadays.
All right. So Warren, what was Bill and Melinda's reaction when you called them on the phone one day and said, by the way, I'm going to give you $85 billion? Or where did that idea come from, and what was their reaction when you told them?
Well, the idea came from the fact that originally I thought that my first wife would outlive me, and I would do the piling up and she would do the unpiling. After I was, and she'd have been good at unpiling too. But when she died first, then I had to have a plan that made sense. And because I love what I'm doing, I would not be particularly good at running a large philanthropic organization. And I needed scale. I needed somebody with the same objectives I had. I'm totally in sync with their belief that every life has equal value. I knew they were going to pour the rest of their lives in huge amounts of time and talent, and so it was an obvious decision.
But it was obvious to them. So when you called, they said, "Oh, that's nice, and let's talk about something else," or were they?
Yeah. What time is the bridge game tonight? Yeah. I'm sure it surprised them somewhat, but they just started thinking about doubling the size of the organization.
So normally, if somebody gives as much money as you gave to that foundation and are going to give, they might say, normally, maybe you could put my name on the foundation. That didn't occur to you?
Yeah, they might have been willing. I had no interest in that whatsoever. I never had my name put on anything.
Okay. So with your own children, you have 3 children, and they have their own philanthropic interests.
Right.
How do you influence them? Do you say, give your money that I've given you to X, Y, and Z, or you have no impact on what they do?
It's entirely their decision. I'm not on the board. I have given them each equal amounts. We started very small, but they've got different talents. They've got different interests. They're all well directed, those interests, and they actually do better because they're following their own instincts than if I gave them some agenda to do. So I think it's a terrible mistake to grade your children against each other in any event. And
You don't want one to say, you like me better, Daddy likes me better than the other.
yeah, well, certainly if I'd given one of them twice what I gave the other, there might have been a certain cause for that.
What about your grandchildren? Are they involved in?
No, they're not. Maybe peripherally just a little bit involved, but they have no philanthropic fund of their own. That's getting too far out. I think it's tough enough. And incidentally, all of the funds of my funds will be spent within 10 years after my estate is settled. I do not believe in trying to figure out what the needs of the world are going to be, or the particular talents of people are going to be 50 years out. So I can't look at my 10 great-grandchildren and say, this one would be wonderful.
But you don't think you'll be looking down and seeing what's going to happen, or you don't really have
I might be looking up, actually.
And what about the tax code? You have been in favor of a large estate tax, or not changing the estate tax we currently have. Do you think that if we eliminated the estate tax, people would give away more money, or not?
I don't think with the large gifts that makes much difference. I don't see a lot of tax planning in the conventional sense among our members of the Giving Pledge. It means nothing to me. I mean, I have an $11 billion carry forward right now on my tax return for charitable. None of it gets used. In effect, I get no tax deduction for it, and it makes no difference at all. Why should I get a tax deduction?
So you're famous for saying that your assistant has a higher tax rate than you do.
She's here today.
Is she? Okay. So what do you think the U.S. government should do about that?
I think they should tax people with very high incomes considerably higher than they do. And they've done that almost throughout history. I mean, and they've done it during times when the country's growing at a faster rate too.
Okay. So David, let me ask you, in your case, you've been involved in a number of environmental philanthropic activities. And have you gone to other members of the Rockefeller family and say, give me money for my philanthropic interest, or you don't recruit money from other members of the Rockefeller family?
That's a really good question. I have, over history, I've had 22 cousins. and on the Rockefeller side. And we discuss matters like that, and we've decided we'd rather be friends than we would treat each other as objects of philanthropic potential. And so we have a rule that we don't solicit each other. And that's been very salubrious. Occasionally, if we have common interests and we hear about something, my cousin Larry saved the Palisades in the last year from having a big LG tower over it. And we heard about that, and many of us said, Larry, what can we do? But he didn't solicit us.
So of all the philanthropic things with which you've been involved, what would you say you take the greatest pride in having achieved on your own?
I hope it's yet to come, but let's think. I think I got involved in ocean health in the year 2000. The Pew Charitable Trust set up a commission, and we discovered all kinds of bad things about the oceans. And as a result of that, I set up an organization, fairly small, called Sailors for the Sea. My wife is on the board of Oceana. We do things together. Our contribution, I think, to the visibility of the oceans being in trouble and some pretty good solutions to it, I think jointly I'm very proud of that.
So because of your name, I assume people come to you all the time and say, well, I'd like you to contribute to X, Y, or Z. Do you get a lot of solicitations, and do you have a standard way of saying, not for me, or how do you deal with all that?
My staff is not in the audience because she's saying no in New York.
Okay.
I was going to take notes on his answer, incidentally.
Worm, what do you do? You must get everybody in the world calling you up.
Yeah, I've pretty well taken care of it by designating now probably 95% of my net worth to the 5 foundations. One thing I thought you might find interesting, this is the letter from the 1960s, and to these trustees I say, as the talents and limitations of my children become more clear as years pass, I may give in to some parental urges, if appropriate, to move them into this organization. Well, they were 17 to 11 then, and they developed in really to be far better than maybe I expected even at the time. and so my wife and I did that as they went along, and I think it's terrific if you can bring your children.
Well, you're famous for having made a fair amount of money, but not having a very ostentatious lifestyle. You're still living in the same home in Nebraska you bought 40 or 50 years ago?
Yeah, well, we bought the house in 1958, and refer once again to this letter. My wife and I were running this foundation in the 60s, but I was explaining it to the 3 new trustees, and I say, we have a tremendous balance presently existed within the foundation officers, the 2 of us, namely a combination of the world's chintziest donor and the world's most generous administrator. So I thought they ought to know the facts.
So you've made all this amount of money.
Yeah.
You now can buy anything, see anything, meet with anybody.
Absolutely.
Is there something on your bucket list you haven't accomplished, other than being on this panel, that you would like to do?
Just see Berkshire become a lot more successful company. No, that's my painting in life, and the proceeds will all go to philanthropy, and I work with people I love. I get to do what I love every day. There's nothing. If there was something I wanted to do, I'd go do it.
You're now 85 years old. Is that right?
That's correct.
85. So you're in remarkable shape, mentally and physically. To what do you attribute that? Your diet, or what would you say it is?
Well, I'm 1/4 Coca-Cola, 1/4 of all the calories. And my assistants here, they get me hamburgers at lunch, and we stick them in a microwave, and I make popcorn when I go home when I play bridge at night. I think, who knows, but I think that doing what you love every day with people you love, I think that's got to be good for you.
Okay. Well, it's my theory that philanthropists are happy people, and happy people live longer. That's why, your great-grandfather lived to be 97, your father's 100. I think people give away money, and that's my theory about why people should give away money. They're going to live longer. But now I can't prove that, but why would anybody want to take a chance?
I'll try to give you proof.
So, Olivier, if we eliminated the tax deduction for charitable contributions in the United States, the U.S. government would pick up a lot of revenue, presumably. Do you think charitable giving would go away a great deal, or what impact would it have?
I don't have the answer to this any more than you do, I think. But I agree with what Warren Buffett said earlier. That is to say, it's more important for the smaller givers than for the bigger givers. It seems to me like if you're just making a small amount of money, the tax deduction does help. Also, it seems to me, to the extent that you are making it possible for people in a capitalist economy to make money, I think it's important to make it easy for them to spend it on something else than themselves. So the tax deduction is a good incentive. I mean, not necessarily financially, but morally speaking. I mean, there is a contribution to the common good, and the government recognizes it. I think the ambiguity is different. That is to say, you're not supposed to have a tax deduction if you use your money for political campaigns or for lobbying and therefore, but it's or to go against, to have projects that somehow or another are not quote unquote legal, but there are many bad laws around there. So how do you give to the civil rights movements in 1950 if you don't go against the law? How do you go for birth control, which the Rockefeller family did a lot of from Margaret Sanger on, if you're not fighting the law because you can, because birth control information is considered pornographic and whatever. So in other words, to make a difference in life, often you have to just break those laws and be political in one important way. And I think the ambiguity of the tax deduction to turn everything into something educational lets philanthropy to sort of new altitudes of equivocation. Right?
So how can we get people in France to be greater philanthropists? People in Europe, they're not famous for being philanthropists. There are obviously some, but compared to the United States, you don't have as many philanthropists. What would be your solution to getting more people in Europe and your native country, France, to be greater philanthropists?
Well, again, my solution, I don't know. I'm a historian, so I tend to predict the past better than the future. But be that as it may, I often, of course, go to France every year, and so I grew up, lots of friends and family, and I'm often involved in debates, and the philanthropy is big on the agenda because the welfare state is broke. But I keep telling them, this is not a replacement for the welfare state. This is something else.
Right. So, Warren, when you created with Bill and Melinda Gates the Giving Pledge, the idea was to try to get people from outside the United States to do it. You've had some efforts in China and other countries. What was the reaction in China when you went there and said, give away half your money to wealthy Chinese?
Well, Bill has been there many times since. We did an initial presentation. It was interesting. I'd say we had 50 or so turnout. We had a party official there to sort of monitor things. And fortunately, he gave it his blessing. But what was interesting, well, there were two things that were particularly interesting to me. One was that once you got people talking, it was like David's father's first dinner. Once you got people talking, you couldn't stop them. I mean, it was a subject they really were interested in, and which they were generally uncomfortable talking about. But now that they were with peers, they were fine. So they talked about the same questions that people talk about in this country, their kids coming into business and how do they, all of that was quite similar. One thing that was interesting, though, was that they felt that to some extent that there was you might say there was a taboo against certain types of philanthropy because it, in effect, would be criticizing the government. If they gave money to hospitals or to schools, they would be saying that the government wasn't doing the job. And so we ran into that. And Bill has really recruited practically everybody outside the United States. We have not had much luck in China yet. We've not had much luck in France yet.
Well, when you talk to people in the United States about joining the Giving Pledge, philanthropists who may not want to join, what is the most creative excuse for not doing it that you...
Well, they don't even bother to get creative usually. The one that's maybe excuse and it may be true. I'm sure the most often response, if they're not joining, is that they want to maintain their privacy. And I'm sure that's legitimate in some cases, but if you're looking for an excuse, that's a hard one for me to tackle. I mean, they can't, it's very hard for them to say, I've got $1 billion, and if I give away half, I won't be able to get along on 500 million. I mean, they'd have a trouble with that. Besides, I've told them I'm going to write a book on how to live on 500 million, since they're, so if you're going to give an excuse, you really want one that's sort of impervious from attack. And if they say, well, what they usually say, it's their spouse, of course, too. They say, I'd join in a minute, but my spouse is worried about the privacy and the effect on the kids. And I'm sure that's a legitimate feeling in a great many cases. I'm also sure it's a cop-out with others.
So before you were involved with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, people don't realize, but you were involved in giving away a fair amount of money to nuclear nonproliferation and population control. Why were you attracted to those causes, and still are?
Well, when we were in our 20s, my wife and I decided that we were going to give away basically all the money we didn't need, and we didn't think we would need that much. And we had a totally common view that it should be given, because I thought it would be a lot of money. She didn't think it'd be a lot of money, but I thought it'd be a lot of money. And I thought it should go to very important worldwide causes that did not have a natural funding constituency. Most universities or hospitals or all kinds of things have a natural funding constituency. The problem of nuclear proliferation originally, now I call it CNBC, cyber, nuclear, biological,
right,
and chemical. But it is, to me, it's the great problem of the world. The problem, and what makes it a huge problem, is that it's hard to figure out how money can have any effect on it. I mean, that's why it is a problem. But I've tried to focus on. We both wanted to focus on that, and we wanted to focus on the problem of unwanted children, basically.
So, Warren, many people who are very wealthy, they feel a need to collect something, books, art, cars, anything. What do you collect? Do you collect anything?
Well, I think in effect, Berkshire's a collection. I mean, that's
you collect companies in Berkshire.
Yeah, we're companies, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
And
with a little luck, we'll collect the world. I mean, actually, but
so when you, by the way, for those who haven't been to your annual meeting, which now gets 30,000 plus
40,000
people, you sit there for 6 hours answering questions.
Correct.
And I mean, you get up to go to the restroom for?
No. That would be a sign of weakness.
Oh, okay. All right. So
my partner's Charlie Charlie Munger's 91. If he could do it, I could do it.
Wow. Got a good urologist. Okay. So, David, the name Rockefeller, when you grow up with it, is it more of a burden than a blessing to grow up with that name? In hindsight, would you say?
Well, I think you go through phases as to whether it is a burden or not, but I share my dad's view. He's 100 now, as you said, and he thinks it's 90% a benefit and a great benefit, and 10% a burden you just need to learn how to deal with. But I don't look for sympathy out there.
Okay, well, you probably don't get a lot, I guess. So today, if you look at let's say, the next 20 years of your life, what would you like to accomplish in philanthropy?
Oh, that's a great one. Well, coming back to the oceans question, there's a lot more visibility about ocean problems, but we have not fixed the fishing fleets of the world. We've not stopped pouring chemicals either from the Mississippi River or anywhere else into the oceans or the cities. And we've got to respect the birthplace of nearly 20% of the protein that we consume. So my ambition, and I think my wife Susan's too, is to make the world not only more aware of that great bountiful resource, but what to do about it. And there are many things that can be done. So
you were a sailor. You're a
Yes,
competitive
sir.
sailor?
Compared to Ted Turner, not, but I
race?
love competing.
And do you win races, or?
I have done so, yes.
And so is the Rockefeller name an advantage when you're racing, or not an advantage?
That's one of the reasons I race, because that metric has nothing to do. We're in a one design fleet. Now, if you're in a fleet of handicap boats, you can buy your way to victory.
But the other people in the crew, they don't treat you differently if your name is Rockefeller than if your name is Rubenstein? Or?
They're very irreverent. I don't know what they would do if my name wasn't Rockefeller.
So, Olivier, as you look back on history, who would you say are the 2 or 3 or 4 most important people in the history of American philanthropy that have really put us to where we are today?
I have a special regard and fondness for Julius Rosenwald. Julius Rosenwald was, of course, the man behind who built Sears, Sears Roebuck, but he was Jewish. He gave fairly little to Jewish charities. He was not a Zionist. Few Jews were Zionists before the war, and some who were, like Brandeis, didn't think American Jews should go to Palestine. But he supported Booker T. Washington. And I think we ought to rehabilitate Booker T. Washington. He was one of the most courageous person in his days. And then he built those 5,400 some elementary schools for black kids in the South. And without those schools, I mean, they just started this whole transformation of the 20th century. We wouldn't have Obama in the White House without having had those schools in the early 20th century. And my former colleague, and who just died recently, Julian Bond, I realized how much admirer of Rosenwald he was. His own father, Horace Mann Bond, was an educator named Horace Mann, quite a name for a black educator, had worked for the Rosenwald Fund in the 20s in Louisiana and built one of those schools, and only to witness a lynching and run out of town before he was next.
Right.
But so I have a great deal of admiration for his courage, and also I think he had all of the significance in his life of a philanthropist, including telling at times Herbert Hoover the truth about what to do to rescue people from the Mississippi flood and so on.
Okay, thank you. Warren, what would you like the Giving Pledge to be in 5 years? We're now 5 years old. Where would you like it to be in 5 years?
Well, it's already exceeded where I thought it would be in 5 years. I think the main thing is not numbers. We need numbers just to be on the map. But really, the most important thing is if our members, or many of our members at least, feel that they've learned more about giving money effectively. I mean, there's a huge amount of money that is going to get committed, and I think most people feel they could do it better. And if this organization helps them do it better, I think that'll be a triumph.
There's presumably a certain cachet to being a member of the Giving Pledge, because it implies that you have a certain net worth. So a lot of people maybe want to be members so they can say, well, look how wealthy I am. But what about for people who are wealthy, but they have $50 million or $100 million or $20 million? What do you say to them about what they should do in philanthropy if they can't qualify to be in the Giving Pledge?
I think many of them do more than we do. My sister, my older sister, she doesn't have $1 billion. She has significant money, but she's 87, and she spends a full day every day, helping other people. She does it retail. I say I do it wholesale.
Is she the one that when people write letters saying I have a hardship problem, she responds?
She responds, and she's.
What's her address?
She's very tough-minded. She's probably tougher-minded than I am. But so it doesn't get automatic responses. But if she decides that it's through no fault of your own that these things have happened to you, that she's looking for the person that's run into bad luck more than people that have made bad decisions. But she not only gives them money, she stays in touch with them maybe the rest of their lives. She finds out whether getting their teeth fixed or getting a new pickup truck or something is helping them. And if it isn't, maybe how she can help them further. And she has her name is the Sunshine Lady. I mean, that's what they call it. And she has these sunbeams around her. These sunbeams are about 85 years old, which is what I am. So you can make a great movie out of it. But they are out there checking on people, working with them. She gives grants, very small grants to schools to develop kids in Omaha that will feed to her ideas on people that need help. So she's giving a lot more to philanthropy than I am.
One of your sisters just gave $100 million to Northwestern University. This University of Nebraska, where you went to school, they call you up all the time and say, your sisters gave $100 million. Why don't you give us $100 million? Do you ever get those calls from University of Nebraska?
I used to. Oh. They wasn't getting them very far. What they usually do is they go to people that made a lot of money in Berkshire, and they say, will you give X and we'll name the business school or something after Warren. But they've got to get my okay to do that, and I don't promote that. But it's interesting when my sister, that's my younger sister, I'd to convince her and others that really, what do you do with all this wealth? I mean, what can it actually do for you? So I've used this story that I've got a bunch of Berkshire certificates in my safe deposit box, and they're worth tens of billions of dollars, but they have no utility to me. They have utility to other people. They can buy medicine and education. They have loads of utility to other people, none to me. The only thing I can do is I can go down once a year and fondle them. And so I told my younger sister that, and she gave that $100 million to Northwestern. I called her, I said, that's terrific, Bertie, how'd you decide to do it? She said, well, I was down there fondling my certificates like you told me to. And I fondled one for 558 shares. So in her acceptance speech, or not acceptance speech, but I went to Northwestern at a little dinner for her, and she explained that she was actually was totally responsible for my success, because when we played Monopoly as a kid, she let me win to build my confidence.
Well, it worked. So any of you, any regrets, Warren, any regrets about your philanthropic activities? You're happy with what you're doing?
100% happy.
David, any regrets?
Yeah, wish I had more to give.
Okay. Olivier, what would you say is the most important thing that ever happened in the history of American philanthropy?
You mean besides being here today?
Right. Well, that might be a good answer.
Yeah.
Well, listen, we have run out of time. I hope you enjoyed a very interesting conversation with our three guests, and I want to thank you all very much for giving this. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.